The fog swallowed sound before it could travel. Senior Chief Damon Okafor pressed his back against cold stone and listened to the radio static that meant their comms were being jammed. Somewhere above them, in a gray soup that hid the mountain peaks of the Zagros Range, enemy fighters were moving into position. 6 SEALs. No air support. No extraction for 9 hours. Before we continue, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Maybe you have known someone who appeared exactly when they were needed most. The intelligence briefing had promised a clean route. Captain Vincent Harwell had assured them the mountain pass would be clear, that local assets had confirmed no hostile activity within 15 kilometers. Now 2 of his men lay bleeding behind a boulder, and Harwell himself crouched 20 meters back, his face pale in the dim morning light. Okafor had seen that look before. Not fear exactly. Something else. Something that looked almost like recognition, as if the captain had been expecting this ambush all along. Petty Officer Tanaka pressed a bandage against Kowalski's shoulder wound and whispered that she needed more gauze. Okafor tossed her his med kit without taking his eyes off the ridgeline. Movement up there. At least 12 hostiles, maybe more, working their way down through the rocks with the patience of men who knew their prey had nowhere to run. Then the shot came. Not at them. The crack echoed across the valley from somewhere impossibly far away, and a body tumbled from a ridge 2,000 meters to the east. Okafor watched the hostile fighter roll down the scree slope and come to rest against a twisted juniper tree. Reynolds, their point man, keyed his radio out of habit even though they all knew it was useless. He muttered that they had contact at 2,000 meters. But there was no contact. There was no one else out here. The mission briefing had been explicit. No friendly assets within 50 kilometers. No air support available. No guardian angels watching over SEAL Team 9. Another shot. Another body falling, this time from a position Okafor had not even identified as a threat. Whoever was shooting could see things they could not. Whoever was shooting had a vantage point that covered the entire valley. Harwell scrambled forward on his hands and knees, his voice tight as he demanded to know who was firing. Okafor told him he did not know. None of them knew. The shots kept coming, each one precise, each one finding a target that had been invisible to the pinned-down SEALs. In the space of 90 seconds, 7 enemy fighters died without any of them understanding how. The fog began to shift. Wind from the east pushed the gray curtains sideways, revealing glimpses of the terrain they had not been able to see. Yaket Bex, a frozen waterfall clinging to a cliff face. And there, on a ridge that should have been empty, a silhouette. Just one figure, standing motionless against the gray sky. The outline of a rifle barrel extended from their shoulder at an angle that suggested they were still scanning for targets. Still hunting. Tanaka saw it too. She asked if that was one of theirs, her voice barely above a whisper. Okafor shook his head. He had memorized every friendly position, every asset, every possible source of support for this mission. That ridge was supposed to be empty. That shooter did not exist. But the bodies cooling on the mountainside said otherwise. The figure moved, lowering the rifle and beginning to traverse the ridge with the easy confidence of someone who had walked these mountains 1,000 times before. They were heading north, away from the SEAL position, disappearing back into the fog that rolled across the peaks like a living thing. Harwell grabbed Okafor's arm and hissed that they needed to move now while the enemy was confused. There was something desperate in the captain's grip, something that went beyond tactical urgency. Okafor looked at the hand on his arm, then at Harwell's face, and filed the observation away for later. Right now, they had wounded men and 9 hours until extraction. Right now, they had a guardian angel who had saved their lives and vanished without explanation. Right now, they had questions that could not be answered and a mission that had already gone sideways in ways none of them understood. The fog closed in again, hiding the ridge where the shooter had stood. But Okafor kept his eyes on that spot for a long moment, trying to memorize the exact position where the impossible had happened. Someone was out there. Someone with skills that matched or exceeded anything he had seen in 15 years of special operations. Someone who had chosen to save 6 American lives and then disappear like smoke. He touched the dog tags hanging beneath his body armor. His brother's tags, the ones they had sent home after Operation Fallen Cedar. Marcus had died in mountains like these 3 years ago on a mission that had gone wrong in ways the official reports never fully explained. The fog swirled and shifted, and somewhere in the distance, Okafor thought he heard the scrape of boots on stone. But when he looked, there was nothing. Only the gray. Only the silence. Only the dead men on the mountainside who had learned too late that something was watching from the heights. Something that did not miss. They moved through the rocks in tactical formation, every man hyper-aware of the ridgelines above. The fog had thickened again, reducing visibility to 40 meters, turning the Zagros Mountains into a gray maze where death could wait behind any boulder. Okafor kept replaying the shots in his mind. 7 kills in 90 seconds from a distance that should have been impossible. He had trained with the best snipers in the world, had watched Devgrim marksmen do things that seemed to defy physics. But 2,000 meters in variable wind, through patchy fog, against moving targets the shooter could barely have seen. That was something else entirely. Reynolds pulled up beside him and muttered that maybe they had a drone operator somewhere, some CIA asset running Overwatch they had not been briefed on. Okafor shook his head. Those shots came from a rifle. He had heard the reports, felt the timing between trigger pull and impact. No drone, no remote system. A human being with a scope and inhuman patience. Harwell pushed them hard toward the secondary extraction point, his voice carrying an edge that bordered on panic. Every time Okafor suggested they slow down to assess the wounded, the captain insisted they press forward. Every time someone mentioned the mystery shooter, Harwell changed the subject. Tanaka caught up to Okafor and kept her voice low. She told him the captain was scared. Not combat scared, not the healthy fear that kept soldiers alive. Something different, something personal. Before Okafor could respond, the first bullet cracked past his head. He hit the ground as the mountainside erupted with muzzle flashes. A flanking team, at least 8 fighters, had circled around while they moved. They were caught in the open, 30 meters from the nearest cover, with wounded men who could not run. Okafor raised his rifle and dropped one hostile, then another. Reynolds was firing controlled bursts to his left. Tanaka had thrown herself over Kowalski to shield his wounded body. Harwell was screaming orders that made no tactical sense, his composure completely shattered. Then the distant shots began again. One by one, the flanking fighters started falling. The enemy squad had emerged from concealment to press their attack, and now they were exposed to that same impossible marksman on the heights. Okafor watched a hostile take a round through the chest from a direction none of them could have anticipated. Then another, then a third. In 12 seconds, the flanking team was eliminated. Silence returned to the mountains. Okafor lay flat on the cold stone, breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. Twice now. Twice their mysterious guardian had intervened at the exact moment they needed saving. His radio crackled. The sound made everyone freeze. Their comms had been jammed since the first ambush. Nothing should have been able to get through. But there it was, a carrier wave breaking through the static, followed by a voice. A woman's voice. She spoke calmly, as if she were reading coordinates during a training exercise rather than in the aftermath of a firefight. She told them their current heading would take them into a kill zone 2 kilometers ahead. She gave them alternative coordinates, a route through a narrow canyon that would provide cover. She told them to move in 15 minutes after the enemy patrols repositioned. Harwell grabbed the radio from Reynolds and demanded identification. He wanted call signs, unit designation, authentication codes. His voice cracked on the last word. Static. Then her response came through, flat and unhurried. Wraith. Okafor felt the blood drain from his face. He knew that call sign. Every operator in the special operations community knew that call sign. It had been retired 3 years ago after Operation Fallen Cedar, after the entire team was declared killed in action. After his brother Marcus had come home in a flag-draped coffin. Harwell's hand trembled on the radio. He said that was impossible. He said Rafe was dead. The entire team was dead. The woman's voice came back, and this time there was something cold beneath the calm. She said the reports of her death had been exaggerated. She said she had been watching them since they inserted. She said she knew why the intelligence had been wrong, why the ambush had been waiting for them, why their comms had been jammed at exactly the right moment. Okafor took the radio from Harwell. His hands were steadier than they should have been, steadier than his heart rate suggested. He asked her if she had served with Marcus Okafor. He asked her if she knew his brother. Silence stretched across the frequency. When she spoke again, the coldness had given way to something that might have been grief. She said Marcus was the best spotter she ever worked with. She said he died protecting her, holding a position so she could escape the ambush that killed everyone else. She said she had carried his memory across 3 years and 2,000 miles of hostile territory. Okafor closed his eyes. He had spent 3 years wondering what had really happened on that mountain. 3 years reading redacted reports and attending classified briefings that raised more questions than they answered. 3 years touching his brother's dog tags and feeling the weight of unanswered questions. Harwell tried to take the radio back, insisting this was an enemy trick, a psychological operation designed to confuse them. But his voice lacked conviction, and his eyes kept darting toward the ridgeline where the shooter had stood. The woman spoke one more time. She told them to follow her coordinates if they wanted to live. She told them the people who had set this ambush were the same people who had killed her team 3 years ago. She told them she had been waiting a very long time for this day. Then she said one more thing, her voice barely above a whisper through the static. She said she was glad to finally meet Marcus's brother. She said he had talked about Damon constantly, had shown her pictures, had made her promise to find him if anything went wrong. The radio went silent. Okafor looked down at the coordinates she had provided, then up at the fog-shrouded ridgeline. Somewhere out there, a ghost was watching over them, a woman who should have been dead, a sniper who had survived the impossible and spent 3 years waiting in the mountains. Harwell ordered them to ignore the coordinates and continue on their original heading. His voice had steadied, but his eyes told a different story. Okafor looked at his captain, at the man who had led them into an ambush that should not have existed, and made a decision. He told the team they were following the new coordinates. He told them Wraith had saved their lives twice already. He told them whatever was waiting on their original route, their mysterious guardian, knew more about these mountains than any intelligence briefing. Harwell started to object, but Reynolds and Tanaka were already moving toward the canyon. The captain stood alone for a moment, his face unreadable, then followed. Behind them, somewhere in the endless gray fog, a woman with a rifle began to move. The canyon was exactly where she said it would be. Narrow walls of ancient stone rose on either side, providing cover from the ridgelines above while channeling them northeast toward terrain the enemy would struggle to surveil. Okafor moved point, following coordinates from a dead woman, trusting a voice on the radio more than his commanding officer. Wraith never showed herself. She stayed ahead of them, invisible, guiding them through the mountains with periodic radio updates that cut through the static like she had access to frequencies no one else could reach. Turn left at the split boulder. Hold position for 4 minutes while a patrol passes overhead. Move quickly through the next 200 meters. There is a gap in their coverage. Every instruction proved accurate. Every warning saved them from contact they could not afford. Whoever she was, whatever had happened to her 3 years ago, Elena Dragomir knew these mountains like she had been born in them. Okafor keyed his radio during a rest break, his voice low enough that Harwell could not hear from his position at the rear of the formation. He asked her about Marcus. He asked what his brother's final moments had been like, whether he had suffered, whether he had known he was going to die. The response took a long time coming. When it did, her voice carried a weight that 3 years of isolation had not diminished. She told him Marcus figured it out first. The ambush, the betrayal, all of it. He saw the trap before anyone else, and instead of running, he pushed her off a cliff into a river 40 feet below. By the time she surfaced, the shooting was over. By the time she climbed back up, everyone was dead. Okafor pressed his forehead against cold stone and breathed through the tightness in his chest. His brother had always been like that, seeing things before others saw them, acting while everyone else was still processing. It was what had made him one of the best spotters in Deborah history. It was what had gotten him killed. He asked why she had not come in. 3 years was a long time to survive alone in hostile territory. 3 years was a long time to let everyone believe she was dead. Her answer was simple. She told him that coming in meant trusting the same people who had set the ambush. Coming in meant putting herself in the hands of whoever had fed her team false intelligence and sent them into a kill zone. Coming in meant dying for real this time. Tanaka appeared at Okafor's shoulder, her face troubled. She whispered that something was wrong with the captain. He had been lagging behind for the last hour, finding reasons to stop, checking his equipment repeatedly, doing everything possible to slow their progress without giving a direct order. Okafor looked back at Harwell. The captain stood apart from the group, his hand resting on his sidearm, his eyes scanning the ridgelines with an intensity that seemed less like vigilance and more like anticipation. Like he was waiting for something, or someone, high above them, hidden among the rocks at an elevation that would have been impossible for anyone without years of mountain experience. A woman watched through a rifle scope. She tracked the team's movement with professional detachment, noting their spacing, their fatigue levels, the way the wounded men were holding up. Good operators. Disciplined even under impossible circumstances. Marcus would have been proud to serve alongside men like these. But her attention kept returning to the man at the rear. Vincent Harwell. Captain Vincent Harwell now, apparently. Promoted since the last time she had seen him, back when he was just a lieutenant commander feeding intelligence assessments to mission planners. Back when he had personally assured her team that the Fallen Cedar operational zone was clear of hostile activity. She watched him check his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. She watched him palm something from his pocket, a device too small to identify at this distance, but shaped like a radio or beacon. She watched him fall further behind the group, creating distance between himself and the men he was supposed to be leading. The crosshairs of her scope settled on the back of his head. She could end it right now. One shot, one kill, justice for Marcus and everyone else who had died because of his treachery. Her finger rested against the trigger guard, not quite touching, not quite ready. Not yet. She needed more than death. She needed exposure. She needed witnesses who could testify to what he was, what he had done, what he was still doing. She needed these SEALs to see the truth for themselves. She lowered the rifle and began moving down the mountain, choosing a route that would intercept the team at a narrow pass 2 kilometers ahead. It was time to stop being a voice on the radio. It was time to show them exactly who had been keeping them alive. The fog was thinning as the day wore on, gray giving way to pale sunlight that revealed the harsh beauty of the Zagros peaks. Okafor pushed through a gap in the rocks and found himself in a small clearing, a natural amphitheater surrounded by boulders that would have made perfect defensive positions. She was standing in the center of it. The woman who called herself Wraith looked nothing like her official service photo. 3 years in the mountains had stripped away any softness, leaving behind something harder and more dangerous. Her face was weathered, a scar running from her left temple to her jaw. Her gear was pieced together from a dozen different sources, military and civilian, and things that looked handmade. The rifle in her hands was a Macmillan TAC-50, customized in ways that spoke to countless hours of modification and care. But her eyes were what stopped Okafor in his tracks, dark and steady, and carrying a grief that 3 years had not diminished. The eyes of someone who had lost everything and rebuilt themselves into something new. The rest of the team filed into the clearing, spreading out instinctively, hands near weapons, but not drawing. Reynolds muttered something under his breath. Tanaka's medical training had her assessing the stranger's physical condition automatically, noting the signs of prolonged stress and inadequate nutrition beneath the hardened exterior. Harwell was the last to enter. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Surprise. Recognition. Fear. Wraith looked past the others, her gaze locking onto the captain with an intensity that made the air feel colder. When she spoke, her voice was the same calm tone from the radio, but underneath it now was something like satisfaction. something like the patience of a predator who had finally cornered its prey. "Hello, Vincent," she said. "Did you think I would stay dead forever?" Harwell recovered faster than Okafor expected. The captain's face smoothed into professional blankness, and when he spoke, his voice carried only mild confusion. He said he was sorry, but he did not recognize her. He said a lot of operators had come through his intelligence briefings over the years. He asked if they had worked together on a specific mission. Wraith studied him the way a sniper studies a target at extreme range. Patient, calculating, reading every micro-expression and shift in body weight. When she responded, her tone gave nothing away. She said it did not matter. What mattered was getting his team out of these mountains alive. She said she knew a route through a pass she had used for 3 years, one that would keep them below enemy observation lines and put them within striking distance of a secondary FOB 12 miles east. Harwell shook his head immediately. He insisted they follow original mission parameters. He said command had extraction coordinates locked in, that deviating from the plan would create confusion and delay. His arguments were tactically sound on the surface, the kind of reasoning that would hold up in any after-action review. But Okafor had been watching him for hours now. He had seen the trembling hands, the sideways glances, the way Harwell's confidence crumbled every time Wraith's name came through the radio. Whatever the captain was hiding, it was eating him alive. Okafor made his decision. He told the team they were following Wraith. He said she had saved their lives 3 times already, and he was not interested in testing their luck on an extraction route that had already been compromised. He said anyone who wanted to follow the captain's original coordinates was welcome to do so alone. No one moved toward Harwell. Reynolds nodded once and asked Wraith which direction. Tanaka was already helping Kowalski to his feet, adjusting his bandages for movement. Even the other wounded man, a petty officer named Chun who had taken shrapnel in his leg, pushed himself up with grim determination. Harwell stood alone at the edge of the clearing. For a moment something flickered across his face, something that looked almost like desperation. Then it was gone, replaced by the professional mask of an officer following his team's consensus. They moved out with Wraith on point. She navigated the mountains with an ease that spoke to thousands of hours of practice. Every handhold was familiar. Every loose stone was anticipated. She knew which paths looked safe but led to dead ends, which seemingly impossible routes actually provided passage. The Zagreus had been her prison and her sanctuary for 3 years, and she had learned its secrets the way a sailor learns the sea. Okafor fell in a step beside her during a traverse across a narrow ledge. He kept his voice low, aware that Harwell was maintaining position 30 meters back. He told her about the funeral. Full military honors at Arlington, a flag-folded ceremony that had fell hollow because there was no body to bury. He told her about his mother, who still lit a candle for Marcus every Sunday. He told her about the questions that had haunted him since the classified briefing where they explained that the entire Fallen Cedar team had been killed by enemy forces who should not have known they were coming. Wraith listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she told him Marcus had talked about their mother constantly. About her cooking, her prayers, the way she used to say the stars were the same everywhere when her sons deployed overseas. She told him Marcus had carried a photo of their family in his chest pocket, over his heart, the entire mission. She paused on the ledge and looked at Okafor directly for the first time. She said she still had the photo. She had taken it from his body before she went into the river. She had carried it for 3 years, a reminder of what she was surviving for. Okafor felt something crack open in his chest. 3 years of grief, of unanswered questions, of rage at circumstances he could not understand. This woman had been with Marcus at the end. She had seen what happened, survived what killed him, and carried his memory across years of isolation. He asked her who did it. He asked who had betrayed them. Wraith's eyes moved past him, settling on Harwell's distant figure. She said she was still working on proving it. She said she had pieces, but not the whole picture. She said the people responsible were careful, connected, and very good at covering their tracks. But she had learned patience in these mountains. She had learned to wait for the right moment. They pressed on through the afternoon, stopping twice to tend to the wounded. During the second stop, Wraith knelt beside Kowalski and examined his shoulder wound with hands that were surprisingly gentle. She produced a small kit from her pack, clean bandages and antiseptic she had scavenged or stolen over the years. Kowalski watched her work and asked how she had survived out here alone. 3 years was longer than any seer training prepared you for. Wraith did not look up from a wound. She said you learned to need less. You learned which plants were edible, which water sources were safe, which caves would shelter you from the worst weather. You learned to become part of the mountain instead of fighting against it. She finished the bandage and told him he would make it. The wound was clean and his vitals were strong. As long as they reached the FOB within 24 hours, he would keep the arm. Okafor noticed Tanaka watching from 20 meters away, but the medic was not looking at Wraith. She was looking at Harwell. The captain had drifted further back from the group, positioning himself behind a boulder that blocked line of sight from the rest of the team. His hand was in his pocket, manipulating something small. His lips were moving. Tanaka caught Okafor's eye and held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked away without saying anything. They made camp as darkness fell, finding a sheltered position beneath an overhang that would hide them from aerial observation. Wraith took first watch without being asked, climbing to a vantage point that gave her sight lines across 3 approach vectors. Okafor lay on cold stone and stared at the stars appearing through gaps in the clouds. The same stars his mother prayed under. The same stars Marcus had seen in his final moments. The sound came just as he was drifting towards sleep, distant at first, then growing. The rhythmic thump of rotor blades cutting through mountain air. Wraith's voice reached them from above, sharp with urgency. Helicopters, 2 of them, moving in a search pattern. They would be overhead in less than 5 minutes. Okafor scrambled to his feet as the team mobilized. Harwell was already standing, his face illuminated by starlight, and there was something in his expression that turned Okafor's blood cold. The captain did not look surprised. He looked like a man whose backup plan had finally arrived. The canyon walls closed around them like a trap. Wraith led them into the narrow passage at a dead run, the only cover available as helicopter searchlights swept across the mountainside. Behind them, the thump of rotors grew louder, closer, more insistent. Okafor pulled Chin along, the wounded petty officer gritting his teeth against the pain in his leg. Reynolds had Kowalski's arm over his shoulder, half carrying the man through the darkness. Tanaka moved between them, ready to assist whoever faltered first. Harwell brought up the rear, and Okafor did not miss the way the captain kept glancing skyward with something other than fear in his eyes. The first burst of gunfire raked the canyon in trance behind them. Rocks shattered and sprayed, fragments stinging exposed skin. The helicopters had thermal imaging, night vision, every advantage that 3 years of hiding in mountains could not counter. Wraith's carefully planned route had become a kill box. She stopped at a bend in the canyon, her face tight with calculation. The passage ahead narrowed further before opening into a valley that would leave them completely exposed. Going back meant facing the helicopters directly. They were trapped. Harwell's voice cut through the chaos, loud enough for everyone to hear. He said this was her fault. He said she had led them into an ambush, that 3 years alone had broken her mind, that she was working with the enemy, whether she knew it or not. Okafor spun to face him. He told the captain to shut his mouth. He said Wraith had saved their lives repeatedly, while Harwell had done nothing but slow them down and question every decision. The team fractured along invisible lines. Reynolds looked between the 2 men, uncertain. Chun slumped against the canyon wall, too exhausted to care about command disputes. Tanaka's hand rested on her sidearm, her eyes moving from Harwell to Wraith and back again. A spotlight swept over the canyon rim above them. Seconds. They had seconds before the helicopter's position for a clear shot into the passage. Wraith moved. She climbed the canyon wall with terrifying speed, finding handholds in the darkness that should not have existed. In moments she was 20 feet up, bracing herself against a narrow ledge, the Macmillan coming to her shoulder in one fluid motion. The lead helicopter banked into view, its door gunner already orienting on the canyon below. 1,400 meters. Moving target. Crosswind from the rotor wash. Impossible shot by any reasonable standard. Wraith fired. The helicopter windscreen shattered. The aircraft lurched sideways, its pilot slumping over the controls, and began a spinning descent toward the valley floor. The explosion when it hit echoed off the mountains like thunder. The second helicopter broke off its approach, pulling back to reassess. Its crew had just watched their lead aircraft get swatted from the sky by a single rifle shot. Whatever confidence they had brought to this hunt was gone. Wraith descended the wall as quickly as she had climbed it. Her face showed nothing, no satisfaction, no relief. Just the cold focus of someone who had been surviving impossible situations for 3 years. Harwell drew his sidearm. The click of the safety disengaging froze everyone in place. The captain's weapon was leveled at Wraith's center mass, his hand steadier than it had been all day. He announced that she was compromised. He said no one could survive 3 years in hostile territory without being turned, without making deals, without becoming something other than what they had been. He said she was a threat to the team, and he was exercising command authority to neutralize that threat. Okafor stepped between them. He told Harwell to lower his weapon. He said if the captain pulled that trigger, he would have to go through Okafor first. He said too many things did not add up, too many coincidences, too many moments where Harwell had been exactly wrong while Wraith had been exactly right. The standoff stretched into seconds that felt like hours. 2 SEALs with weapons drawn, a ghost sniper behind them, and somewhere in the darkness above, a helicopter circling like a vulture waiting for carrion. Tanaka spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it carried in the canyon's acoustics. She said she had seen the captain behind the boulder during their last rest stop. She said she had seen him talking into a device, something small that was not standard issue. She said she had watched him transmit something while the rest of the team prepared to move. Harwell's face went through a series of expressions. Denial first, then calculation, then something that looked almost like relief. The mask was slipping, and part of him seemed glad to let it fall. Wraith stepped around Okafor, moving slowly, her rifle lowered but ready. She told Harwell she knew. She said she had known since she first saw him through her scope, watching him check his watch, watching him hang back from his team, watching him do everything possible to slow their progress toward safety. She said he was using the same playbook he had used 3 years ago, feeding coordinates to the enemy, letting them position for the perfect ambush. She said the only difference was that this time, she was not the target. This time, he had used his own men as bait. Harwell laughed. The sound was hollow, empty of humor. He asked what she thought she was going to do about it. He reminded her that he was still a commissioned officer. He said her word meant nothing, that she was a deserter at best, a traitor at worst. He said no one would believe a dead woman over a decorated captain. The second helicopter's searchlight swept across the canyon rim. They were running out of time. Okafor looked at Wraith, then at Harwell, then at the team that had followed him into these mountains. Reynolds and Tanaka and Chun and Kowalski. Men and women who had trusted the system, trusted their chain of command, trusted that the people giving orders had their best interests at heart. He lowered his weapon and told everyone they were moving. He said they would sort out the command issues when they reached safety. He said right now, their only objective was survival. Wraith nodded once and began leading them deeper into the canyon. Harwell hesitated, his sidearm still raised, calculating his options. Then he holstered the weapon and followed. But Okafor saw the look in his eyes. The captain was not done. He was waiting, planning, preparing for the moment when he could finish what he had started. Above them, the helicopter continued its patient circle, and somewhere in the darkness ahead, the enemy was repositioning. The cave entrance was invisible until you were standing directly in front of it. A narrow crack in the rock face, hidden behind a curtain of frozen vegetation, opened into a passage that descended into the mountain. Wraith led them through without hesitation, her feet finding familiar paths in absolute darkness. They emerged into a larger chamber lit by battery-powered lanterns that cast long shadows across stone walls. Okafor stopped 2 steps inside, and felt his breath catch in his throat. The walls were covered. Photographs, documents, maps with handwritten annotations, intercepted communications printed on weathered paper, string connecting different pieces, creating a web of evidence that spread across 3 walls of the cave like the work of a brilliant mind pushed past its breaking point. Wraith set down her rifle and turned to face them. She said welcome to her home. She said she'd been building this for 3 years, one piece at a time, waiting for the moment when someone would finally see it. Okafor moved closer to the nearest wall. His brother's face stared back at him from unit photograph, circled in red marker. Next to it was an intelligence assessment dated 2 days before Operation Fallen Cedar, stamped with classification markings that should have kept it buried forever. The assessment clearly identified hostile forces in the operational area, clearly recommended mission postponement, clearly warned that insertion would result in enemy contact. The assessment was signed by Lieutenant Commander Vincent Harwell. He turned to face the captain. Harwell stood near the cave entrance, his face cycling through emotions too fast to track. Calculation, fear, defiance. Wraith began speaking, her voice flat and methodical, reciting facts she had memorized through 3 years of obsessive reconstruction. She explained that Operation Fallen Cedar was never about the target they had been sent to eliminate. The target was secondary, a convenient excuse for inserting a DevGru team into hostile territory. The real purpose was eliminating her team before they could report what they had discovered during a previous operation. She pointed to a section of the wall covered in financial documents. Shell companies, wire transfers, shipping manifests. Her team had stumbled onto evidence that a Pentagon defense contractor was selling weapons to enemy forces through a complex network of intermediaries. American weapons. Weapons that were being used to kill American soldiers. Tanaka moved to examine the documents. Her medical training did not extend to financial forensics, but even she could follow the trail of money from American defense budgets to offshore accounts to arms dealers operating in exactly the regions where her fellow service members were dying. Wraith continued. She said her team had reported their findings through proper channels. They had trusted the system. They had believed that exposing corruption was exactly what they were supposed to do. Instead, someone had decided they needed to disappear. She pointed to another section of the wall. Mission planning documents for Fallen Cedar, showing the original intelligence assessment alongside the modified version that had actually been used. Someone had scrubbed the warnings. Someone had changed hostile to minimal. Someone had signed off on sending 12 operators into a kill zone. Okafor found his brother's personnel file pinned to the wall. Marcus Okafor, Senior Chief Petty Officer, 17 years of service, expertise in reconnaissance and target identification. The file included a handwritten note in the margin, added by Wraith over years of investigation. Primary threat. First target. He knew. She said Marcus had figured it out before anyone else. During the insertion, he had noticed inconsistencies between their briefing and the actual terrain. He had seen the ambush positions before the first shot was fired. And instead of trying to fight through, instead of dying with his team, he had made a choice. Her voice cracked for the first time. She said Marcus had grabbed her by the vest and thrown her off the ridge into the river below. He had given her the only chance of survival any of them had. By the time she surfaced, he was already dead. Okafor felt something break inside his chest. 3 years of grief, 3 years of unanswered questions, 3 years of touching his brother's dog tags and wondering what had really happened on that mountain. The tears came before he could stop them, sliding down his face in the cold cave air. Reynolds put a hand on his shoulder. Tanaka looked away, her own eyes bright. Even Chun and Kowalski, barely conscious from their wounds, seemed to understand the weight of the moment. Harwell spoke. His voice was steady now, almost calm. He said it was necessary. He said the weapons program had saved thousands of American lives by funding operations that could never appear in official budgets. He said sometimes sacrifices had to be made for the greater good. He said 12 operators were an acceptable loss compared to the strategic advantages the program provided. Wraith turned to face him. and a look in her eyes made Okafor reach for his weapon. She asked about the 37 Marines. She asked if they were acceptable losses, too. Harwell's composure flickered. She pointed to the final section of her evidence wall. Casualty reports, incident investigations, ballistic analyses. She said the weapons that the contractor had sold to enemy forces were used in an ambush 6 months after Fallen Cedar. 37 Marines died in a single engagement, cut down by American-made weapons that should never have left the country. She said those Marines had families too. Mothers who lit candles, brothers who wore dog tags, children who would grow up without fathers. She said Harwell had not just killed her team. He had killed everyone those weapons had touched. And he had done it for money, for career advancement, for the approval of men in suits who would never see the inside of a combat zone. Harwell's hand moved toward his sidearm. Okafor was faster. He crossed the distance between them in 3 steps and drove his fist into the captain's jaw. Harwell went down hard, his head cracking against stone, and before he could recover, Okafor was on top of him, hand around his throat. Reynolds and Tanaka pulled him off before he could finish what he started. Harwell gasped for air, blood streaming from his split lip, staring up at the SEAL who had finally seen the truth. Wraith watched without moving. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. She said killing him would not bring Marcus back. She said killing him would not expose the others who had profited from the program. She said she had spent 3 years learning patience, learning to wait for the right moment, learning that justice required more than death. She said she needed witnesses. She needed people who could testify to what Harwell was, what he had done, what he had just admitted in front of his entire team. Okafor looked down at the man who had murdered his brother. Every instinct screamed for blood. Every memory of Marcus demanded vengeance. But Wraith was right. Death was too easy. Death let Harwell escape the consequences of his choices. He stepped back and let the captain live. For now, the silence in the cave was heavy with grief and rage. Harwell sat against the far wall where Reynolds had positioned him, his wrists bound with medical tape, his split lip swelling in the lamplight. He was still technically their commanding officer. The tape was a compromise between military protocol and the overwhelming desire to throw him off the nearest cliff. Okafor stood before the evidence wall, his eyes tracing the web of string and photographs, following the threads that connected his brother's death to boardrooms and bank accounts thousands of miles away. His hands had stopped shaking, but the cold fury in his chest had not diminished. Every few minutes his gaze drifted to Harwell, and his fingers twitched toward his sidearm. Wraith noticed. She moved to stand beside him, close enough that he could hear her breathing. She told him she understood. She said she had spent the first year in these mountains thinking of nothing but killing Vincent Harwell. She had tracked his career, learned his patterns, identified a dozen different opportunities to put a bullet through his skull. But every time she raised her rifle, she thought about the men above him, the contractors, the officials, the entire network that had made Fallen Cedar possible. She said killing Harwell would feel like justice, but it would only cut off one branch. The tree would keep growing. More teams would be sacrificed. More weapons would flow to enemies. More families would receive folded flags and empty explanations. Okafor asked what she wanted instead. She wanted exposure. She wanted testimony from witnesses who could not be dismissed as traumatized survivors or disgruntled operators. She wanted Harwell in a courtroom, on record, forced to name every person who had authorized the program. She wanted the tree burned from the roots. Tanaka approached with her medical kit. She told them Chin's leg was stabilized, but he needed proper surgical care within 18 hours or they risked permanent damage. Kowalski was holding steady, but his shoulder wound was showing early signs of infection. They could not stay in this cave much longer. Wraith nodded. She said there was a secondary FOB 12 miles east, smaller than the main installation, but equipped with communications and medical facilities. If they could reach it, they could get a message out to someone she trusted. Reynolds asked who that might be. After everything they had learned, trusting anyone in the command structure seemed suicidal. Wraith said there was one person, Commander Elias Brennan. He had been her mentor before Fallen Cedar, the man who had recruited her into DevCrew and guided her development as a sniper. She said Brennan had never believed the official story of her death. He had pushed for additional investigation, asked uncomfortable questions, made himself unpopular with the wrong people. If anyone in command would help them expose the truth, it was him. The team began preparing to move. Chen was fitted with a makeshift splint that would allow him to walk with assistance. Kowalski received fresh bandages and a dose of antibiotics from Wraith's scavenged medical supplies. Reynolds distributed the remaining ammunition, ensuring everyone had enough to fight through whatever waited between them and the FOB. Okafor did not move. He remained in front of the evidence wall, staring at his brother's photograph. Wraith returned to his side. She waited. Finally, he asked about Marcus's last moments. Not the tactical details, not the sequence of events. He asked if his brother had said anything. Any final words? Any message he was supposed to carry? Wraith was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he had heard it since she first made contact over the radio. She said Marcus had been calm, even with bullets cracking past them. Even with his team dying around him, he had been completely calm. He had looked at her with those steady eyes she remembered from 100 operations, grabbed her vest, and spoken 4 words before he threw her off the ridge. Tell Damon the stars. Okafor felt his knees weaken. He reached out and steadied himself against the cave wall. Wraith continued. She said she had not understood at first. She thought it was the beginning of a longer message, something cut off by the chaos of combat. But over 3 years of isolation, she had come to realize it was complete. Marcus had known exactly what he was saying. Okafor closed his eyes. The stars are the same everywhere. His mother's words. Her comfort to 2 sons who spent their lives deploying to distant corners of the world. Whenever you feel lost, look up. The stars will guide you home. Marcus had known he was dying, and his final thought had been to send their mother's blessing to his brother through the only person who might survive to deliver it. The tears came again, but this time Okafor did not fight them. He let them fall in the darkness of the cave, surrounded by evidence of betrayal and the quiet presence of the woman who had carried his brother's last words across 3 years and 2,000 miles. Wraith reached into a pocket and produced a weathered photograph. She handed it to him without speaking. His family, his mother and father, Marcus and Damon, standing in front of their childhood home in Detroit. Marcus had carried this photo over his heart. Wraith had carried it ever since. Okafor held the photograph like it was made of glass. He told her thank you. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. Wraith said Marcus had been right about him. She said his brother had told her stories during long nights on Overwatch, had described Damon's stubbornness and loyalty and refusal to ever give up on anything that mattered. She said meeting him felt like meeting family. Across the cave, Harwell shifted against his restraints. His eyes moved between the team members, calculating, assessing. The captain was a survivor. He had not climbed this high in the special operations community without knowing how to adapt to changing circumstances. His bound hands worked slowly behind his back, fingers manipulating something small he had palmed before Reynolds secured him. A tracker, emergency beacon, the kind of device that command staff carried for exactly these situations. He pressed the activation button and felt the tiny vibration that confirmed transmission. Help was coming, not for the team, for him. Wraith gathered her gear and announced they were moving. 12 miles through mountain terrain, in darkness, with wounded men and an enemy that knew these peaks almost as well as she did. It would take everything they had. Okafor tucked his brother's photograph into his chest pocket, over his heart where Marcus had carried it. He checked his weapon, confirmed his ammunition count, and took his position in the formation. They moved out into the night, leaving the cave and its evidence wall behind. Above them, the stars burned cold and distant. The same stars, everywhere. The mountains at night were a different world. Temperature dropped 30 degrees once the sun disappeared, turning exposed skin numb within minutes. Every sound carried farther in the cold air, every footstep echoing off stone walls that had stood for millennia. Wraith moved through this darkness like she had been born in it. She knew which rocks were stable, which patches of ice would hold weight, which narrow passages offered shortcuts invisible to anyone who had not spent 3 years mapping every meter of terrain. The team followed her in single file, trusting her completely now in a way they had not trusted their own commanding officer. Harwell walked in the middle of the formation, his bound hands visible to Reynolds behind him. The captain had said nothing since they left the cave. His silence felt calculated, patient, the silence of a man who believed rescue was coming. During a brief rest stop on a sheltered ledge, Tanaka distributed the last of their water. She made a dark joke about how her recruiting officer had promised world travel and adventure, and how technically this qualified as both. Reynolds laughed quietly. Even Shin managed a pained smile. Ray surprised everyone by contributing. She said 3 years ago, she would have killed for a recruiting office. The desk, the climate control, the complete absence of men trying to shoot her. She said she had developed a deep appreciation for boring desk jobs. It was the first time any of them had heard her joke. The moment of levity broke something loose, a reminder that they were all human beings underneath the tactical gear and survival instincts. Okafor moved to sit beside her while the others rested. He kept his voice low enough that Harwell could not hear. He asked why she had never tried to come in. 3 years was a long time. Surely at some point she could have found a way to reach friendly forces, to tell her story, to expose what had happened. Wraith stared out at the darkness below them. When she answered, her voice carried the weight of hard-learned lessons. She asked who would have believed her. A dead woman appearing from hostile territory, claiming a decorated intelligence officer had orchestrated the murder of her entire team. She had no proof that would survive official scrutiny. The evidence in her cave was circumstantial, the kind of thing that could be explained away by competent lawyers and classified redactions. Harwell had connections, protection, the benefit of every doubt the military-industrial complex could provide. She needed something more. She needed witnesses. She needed people who had seen Harwell's treachery firsthand, who could testify to his behavior under pressure, who could corroborate her story with their own observations. Okafor felt something cold settle in his stomach. He asked how long she had been planning this. Wraith did not look away from the darkness. She said 6 months. She had spent 6 months feeding false intelligence through channels she knew Harwell monitored. She had created the perfect bait, a mission profile that would be irresistible to the people running the weapons program. A small team, minimal support, operating in exactly the kind of remote terrain where accidents happened and evidence disappeared. She had known Harwell would sell them out. She had counted on it. Okafor's hand moved toward his weapon before he could stop himself. He said she had used them as bait. She had deliberately put 6 lives at risk to spring her trap. Wraith turned to face him. Her eyes held no apology, no regret. Only the cold certainty of someone who had weighed every option and chosen the path most likely to succeed. She said she had saved them as witnesses. She said she had been watching from the moment they inserted, ready to intervene the instant Harwell's betrayal manifested. She said she had killed more than 20 enemy fighters to keep them alive. She said she had done everything in her power to ensure they would survive to tell the truth. She said the alternative was letting Harwell continue. More teams sacrificed, more weapons sold, more families destroyed. She asked if he would have done anything different if he had been in her position. Okafor stared at her for a long moment. The anger was still there, burning in his chest. But underneath it was something else. Understanding. Recognition. He thought about Marcus. His brother had thrown Wraith off a cliff to save her life, knowing he would die in the process. He had made an impossible choice because it was the only choice that mattered. He had sacrificed everything for the chance that someone would survive to tell the truth. Wraith had done the same thing. Different methods, different timeline, but the same fundamental calculation. Risk everything. Save what matters. Make the bastards pay. He told her his brother would have done the same thing. Wraith nodded once. She did not thank him. She did not need to. The understanding between them was complete. They moved out as false dawn began to lighten the eastern horizon. The FOB was 2 miles ahead, nestled in a valley that provided natural protection from observation. Wraith had used it as a waypoint during her years of survival, watching its patterns, learning its rhythms. She stopped at a ridge overlooking the valley and raised her rifle scope to survey the approach. Then she froze. She told them to get down. Her voice was tight, urgent, stripped of the calm that had characterized every order she had given. Okafor crawled to her position and looked through his own optics. His breath caught in his throat. The FOB was burning. Smoke rose from multiple structures within the compound. Vehicles were overturned, barriers breached. Figures moved through the wreckage, but they were not American. They wore mismatched tactical gear and moved with the discipline of professional mercenaries. Wraith identified them immediately. Volkov's men, Russian-led private military contractors who operated throughout the region. They were the end buyers, the people who actually received the weapons Harwell's program had been funneling to enemy forces. Behind them, Harwell laughed. The sound was quiet but unmistakable. Okafor turned to see the captain's face split by a smile that looked nothing like the professional mask he had worn throughout the mission. Harwell said she had underestimated him. He said he had activated an emergency beacon in the cave, one that broadcast on frequencies his Russian contacts monitored. He said Volkov had been eager to clean up this particular mess, especially when Harwell had sweetened the deal with information about a certain ghost sniper who had been causing problems for his operations. He said they were surrounded. He said there was nowhere left to run. He said the only question now was whether they wanted to die fighting or die surrendering. Below them, the FOB continued to burn. Above them, the sound of helicopter rotors began to grow in the distance. Wraith looked at the destruction, at the mercenaries swarming through American positions, at the captain who had brought death to everyone around him. Then she shouldered her rifle and began calculating distances. Wraith did not wait for a plan. She moved down the ridge like water flowing over stone, rifle up, already engaging targets before the rest of the team had processed what was happening. Her first shot dropped a mercenary at 900 meters. Her second took out a machine gunner who had been setting up a position overlooking the FOB's northern approach. Her third and fourth came so close together they sounded like a single report, and two more fighters crumpled in the smoke below. Okafor had trained with the best operators in the world. He had seen things in combat that most people could not imagine. But watching Wraith work was something else entirely. 3 years of survival had stripped away everything unnecessary, leaving behind a weapon in human form. He gave the order to move, and the team advanced down the slope in a staggered formation. Reynolds took point with Okafor, while Tanaka helped Chun and Kowalski navigate the treacherous terrain. They could not match Wraith's pace, but they could support her assault with suppressive fire and flanking maneuvers. The mercenaries had not expected resistance. They had come to clean up a damaged FOB and eliminate any survivors, not to fight a coordinated counterattack led by Ghost. Confusion spread through their ranks as fighters fell to shots from impossible angles. Okafor reached the perimeter wall and took cover behind an overturned vehicle. Muzzle flashes strobed through the smoke as the remaining mercenaries tried to organize a defense. He dropped two with controlled bursts, then moved to a better position while Reynolds covered him. A fighter appeared from behind a burning structure, weapon rising toward Okafor's exposed back. He did not see the threat. He did not hear the footsteps over the chaos of combat. Tanaka did. She put 3 rounds through the mercenary's chest before Okafor even knew he was in danger. The man collapsed less than 10 feet away, his rifle clattering against concrete. Okafor looked at Tanaka, at the medic who had spent the entire mission patching wounds and staying out of direct combat. She nodded once and moved to rejoin the wounded, her hands steady despite the adrenaline that had to be flooding her system. He made a mental note to recommend her for a combat citation if they survived this. The team pushed deeper into the FOB, clearing structures one by one. Wraith had relocated to an elevated position inside the compound, her rifle cracking at irregular intervals as she eliminated threats the ground team could not see. Every shot was precise. Every target fell. Then Okafor noticed Harwell was gone. The captain had been secured at the rear of the formation, his bound hands supposedly limiting his options. But somewhere in the chaos of the assault, he had slipped away. The medical tape that had restrained him lay discarded near the perimeter wall, cut by something sharp. Okafor scanned the compound and caught movement near the eastern gate. Harwell, running toward a cluster of vehicles where the mercenary command element had established their position. Running toward Volkov. He keyed his radio and told Wraith he had eyes on the captain. He said Harwell was heading for the Russian commander. He said if Harwell reached Volkov, they would extract him to somewhere American justice could not follow. Wraith's response came immediately. She said she saw him. She said she had the shot. Okafor looked up at her position. Even from this distance, he could see her rifle tracking Harwell's movement. 1,800 meters. A difficult shot, but well within her demonstrated capability. She could end this right now. Put a bullet through the man who had murdered her team and betrayed his country. The shot did not come. Okafor demanded to know why she was not firing. He said Harwell was getting away. He said everything they had sacrificed would mean nothing if the captain escaped. Wraith's voice was calm through the radio static. She told him to check his helmet camera. She asked if it was recording. She said Harwell had confessed in front of the entire team, had admitted to authorizing the ambush, had justified the deaths of 12 operators and 37 Marines. But her word meant nothing. The testimony of a woman declared dead 3 years ago would be picked apart by lawyers and buried by classification orders. She needed video. She needed Harwell's confession captured on equipment that could be authenticated, recorded by witnesses whose credibility could not be questioned. She needed Okafor to reach the captain before Volkov did, to get him talking, to make him repeat everything he had said in that cave. She said the camera in Okafor's helmet was their best evidence. She said Harwell's arrogance would be his undoing if given the chance to gloat. She said she would keep him alive long enough for Okafor to get the confession they needed. Okafor understood. He hated it, but he understood. He told Reynolds to hold the FOB and started running. Wraith's rifle cracked twice as he sprinted toward the eastern gate. 2 mercenaries who had been moving to intercept him dropped without ever seeing the threat. She was clearing his path, eliminating every obstacle between him and the man who had destroyed both their lives. The radio crackled with a new voice. Not Wraith. Not any of his team. Commander Brennan. The transmission was broken by static, but the words were clear enough. Brennan said he had received their emergency signal before the FOB went dark. He said air support was inbound. He said A-10S would be on station in 20 minutes, with extraction helicopters right behind them. He said something else, his voice cracking with emotion that decades of military service had not prepared him to control. He said Elena. He said Wraith. He said he had never believed she was dead. He said he was coming to bring her home. Okafor kept running. 20 minutes. He had 20 minutes to reach Harwell, to get a confession on camera, to deliver the justice that 3 years of survival had been building toward. Ahead of him, the captain disappeared into the smoke surrounding Volkov's position. Behind him, Wraith began moving down from her perch, rifle ready, preparing to close the distance for the final confrontation. The endgame had begun. Okafor found them in a clearing behind the burning motor pool. Harwell stood with his hands raised, facing a man who could only be Konstantin Volkov. The Russian mercenary commander was exactly what his intelligence file suggested. Compact, weathered, with eyes that calculated profit margins even in the middle of a firefight. 4 of Volkov's men formed a loose perimeter, their weapons trained outward to cover approaches. They had heard the radio traffic. They knew American air support was inbound. The smart play was extraction, not confrontation. Okafor stepped into view with his rifle raised. He announced himself, told everyone to freeze, made sure his helmet camera had a clear line of sight to Harwell's face. Volkov studied him with professional interest. The Russian asked if he was the one who had been causing such expensive problems for his operation. He said his men had reported a sniper in the mountains, a ghost who had killed more than 30 of his fighters over the past 3 years. He said he had begun to think she was a myth. Okafor said she was very real. He said she was also very close. Harwell seized the moment. He told Volkov to shoot the SEAL, to eliminate the witness, to clean this up the way they had cleaned up problems before. His voice was desperate, stripped of the professional composure he had maintained throughout the mission. Volkov did not move. He looked at Harwell the way a businessman looks at a failed investment. He said the captain was no longer a customer. He said customers paid for services rendered and provided value in return. He said a man with American aircraft 20 minutes away and a trail of evidence leading back to defense contractors was not valuable. He said such a man was a liability. Harwell's face went through a rapid series of emotions. Disbelief, anger, fear. He tried a different approach, promising money, promising connections, promising that his people in Washington would make any problems disappear. Volkov shook his head. He told Harwell that Washington was the problem. He said the weapons program had been useful when it was quiet, when the money flowed without scrutiny. But Dead SEAL teams and burning FOBs attracted attention. Congressional hearings attracted attention. He said his employers preferred shadows to spotlights. He turned to Okafor and made an offer. He said he would give them Harwell. He would provide copies of every communication, every transaction record, every piece of evidence connecting the captain to the weapons pipeline. In exchange, he wanted consideration when the extraction helicopters arrived. Not freedom, just consideration. A chance to negotiate rather than die in a firefight with American close air support. Okafor told him to step away from the captain. He said they would discuss terms after Harwell was secured. Volkov nodded and gestured to his men. They lowered their weapons and moved back, creating distance between themselves and the American officer who had become toxic to everyone who touched him. Harwell saw his last protection evaporating. The desperation in his eyes crystallized into something uglier, something that had been hiding beneath the professional surface all along. He started talking. He said they did not understand what they were destroying. He said the weapons program had funded operations that saved thousands of lives, that eliminated threats before they could reach American soil. He said Fallen Cedar had been necessary, that Wraith's team had stumbled onto something bigger than themselves, something they could not be allowed to expose. He said Marcus Okafor had been the most dangerous because he had figured it out first. He said eliminating Marcus had been the priority from the moment the team inserted. He said the ambush had been designed specifically to ensure the senior chief died before he could transmit his findings. Okafor felt his finger tighten on the trigger. Every word was being recorded. Every confession was being captured by the camera in his helmet. But the rage building in his chest did not care about evidence. He asked Harwell if he had any idea what Marcus meant to their family. He asked if he had considered the mother who still lit candles every Sunday, the brother who wore dog tags as a reminder of everything he had lost. Harwell laughed. He said soldiers died. He said that was what soldiers did. He said Marcus Okafor had been a line item in a budget calculation, an acceptable loss weighed against strategic objectives. The shot did not come from Okafor. Wraith emerged from the smoke with her rifle trained on Harwell's center mass. She moved like something from a nightmare, 3 years of rage compressed in his steady hands and cold eyes. She stopped 10 feet from the captain, close enough that she could not miss, far enough that he could see exactly who was about to kill him. Harwell recognized her fully for the first time. Not the weathered survivor from the mountains, but the operator she had been before Fallen Cedar. The woman he had sent to die. He asked if she was going to murder him. He said that would make her know better than him. He said she would spend the rest of her life knowing she had become exactly what she hated. Wraith's finger rested on the trigger. The muzzle of her rifle did not waver. Okafor spoke. He said her name, Elena. Then he said the words his brother had died to deliver. The stars are the same everywhere. Wraith went still. Her eyes stayed on Harwell, but something shifted in her expression. The rage was still there, but underneath it was something else. Memory. Connection. The faintest echo of who she had been before 3 years of isolation had stripped everything away. She lowered the rifle. She told Harwell he did not deserve a soldier's death. She said he deserved to die in a cell, in shame, surrounded by the evidence of everything he had done. She said she wanted him to live long enough to see his name destroyed, his legacy erased, his precious program exposed for the corruption it had always been. She said death was too easy for him. The sound of jet engines rolled across the mountains. 10 warthogs, their distinctive silhouettes visible against the lightning sky, began their gun runs on the remaining mercenary positions. The ground shook with the impact of 30-millimeter rounds chewing through vehicles and fortifications. Extraction helicopters appeared on the horizon, their rotors catching the first rays of sunrise. Brennan's voice came through the radio, clear now, no longer broken by static. "Wraith, Elena, I am on the first bird. We are bringing you home." Okafor secured Harwell's hands behind his back, while Volkov watched with calculating interest. The Russian had made his choice, picked the winning side, positioned himself for whatever negotiation came next. The helicopters began their descent toward the FOB. 3 years. 3 years of survival, of isolation, of carrying the dead with her through endless mountains. It was finally over. The first helicopter touched down in a storm of dust and rotor wash. Brennan was out before the skids fully settled, moving with an urgency that defied his 57 years and the silver eagles on his collar. Wraith stood at the edge of the landing zone, her rifle finally lowered, watching the man who had shaped her into the operator she became. He looked older than she remembered, more gray in his hair, more lines around his eyes. 3 years had changed both of them. Brennan stopped 5 feet away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The roar of the helicopter filled the silence, but it felt distant, unimportant compared to the weight of the reunion. He said her name, just her name, Elena. Then he closed the distance and embraced her. Wraith stiffened at first. 3 years of isolation had made human contact feel foreign, almost threatening. But something in Brennan's grip broke through the wall she had built. She let herself lean into the embrace, let herself feel the relief of being found after so long in the wilderness. Brennan pulled back and looked at her face. He said he had never believed the official reports. He said he had pushed for additional investigation, had made himself unpopular with people who wanted fallen cedar buried and forgotten. He said he had kept her file open, kept her listed as missing rather than killed, kept a small flame of hope burning even when everyone told him to let it go. Wraith said she knew. She said she had monitored his career from the mountains, had seen the reprimands and the passed-over promotions. She said she was sorry for what her survival had cost him. Brennan shook his head. He said it had cost him nothing that mattered. He said the only thing that mattered was standing in front of him right now. Behind them, Reynolds and Tanaka were escorting Harwell toward the second helicopter. The captain's hands were secured behind his back, his uniform torn and bloodied from the chaos of the assault. Every SEAL he passed looked at him with undisguised contempt. One of the extraction team read him his rights. The words carried across the landing zone, formal and final. Harwell said nothing. His face had gone blank, the calculating intelligence behind his eyes finally accepting that no amount of maneuvering would save him now. The wounded went next. Chun was loaded onto a stretcher, his leg immobilized, his face pale but determined. Kowalski walked under his own power, supported by Tanaka, his shoulder wound freshly bandaged by the medics who had arrived with Brennan. Volkov and his surviving men were secured separately, their weapons confiscated, their status somewhere between prisoners and cooperating witnesses. The Russian had made his choice, and now he would see whether that choice paid dividends. Wraith drifted away from the organized chaos, moving toward the edge of the FOB where the perimeter wall had been breached. Beyond it, the mountains rose in layers of gray and brown, peaks still shrouded in the morning fog that had hidden her for so long. Okafor found her there. He stood beside her without speaking, following her gaze toward the wilderness that had been her prison and her sanctuary. The silence between them was comfortable now, shaped by shared trauma and mutual understanding. He asked if she was going to miss it. Wraith considered the question. She said some parts. She said the silence had become familiar, the solitude had become a kind of peace. She said there were moments, watching the sunrise from a high ridge or listening to the wind move through the passes, when she had almost forgotten why she was hiding. But those moments never lasted. The mission always reasserted itself. The dead always demanded their due. Okafor reached up and removed the dog tags from around his neck. Marcus's tags. He had worn them every day for 3 years, a weight against his chest that reminded him of everything he had lost. He held them out to Wraith. He said she had earned them. He said she had carried his brother's memory longer and farther than anyone could have asked. He said Marcus would have wanted her to have them. Wraith looked at the tags, but did not take them. She said they belonged with family. She said Okafor should take them home, should give them to their mother, should tell her that Marcus had found his way even at the end. She said the stars had guided him, just like she always promised. She said Marcus's last act had been to save her life. The best way to honor that was to make sure his memory lived on with the people who loved him most. Okafor closed his hand around the tags. He said he would tell his mother everything. He said she deserved to know what her son had done, what he had sacrificed, how his courage had made everything that followed possible. Brennan's voice called them back to the helicopters. It was time to go. Wraith took one last look at the mountains. Somewhere up there was the cave where she had spent 3 years building her case, assembling evidence, waiting for the moment when justice became possible. Somewhere up there were the ghosts of her team, finally at rest now that their deaths would not go unanswered. She turned her back on the wilderness and walked toward the waiting aircraft. Inside the helicopter, she caught her reflection in the window as they lifted off. The face that looked back was barely recognizable. Weathered skin, the scar running from temple to jaw, eyes that had seen too much death and carried too much grief. She had been a different person before Fallen Cedar. That person was gone now, replaced by whatever she had become in the mountains. Tanaka settled into the seat across from her. The medic looked exhausted, the adrenaline of combat finally giving way to bone-deep fatigue. But there was a question in her eyes. She asked what happened now. She asked what awaited Wraith when they landed. Debriefings and investigations and the cold machinery of military justice examining 3 years of unauthorized survival. Wraith said she did not know. She said there would be questions she could not answer and decisions that were not hers to make. She said the best case was probably a medical discharge. The worst case was a court-martial for desertion, for going dark without authorization, for all the rules she had broken in pursuit of the truth. Brennan leaned forward from his seat near the cockpit. He said she should not worry about court-martials. He said he had been making calls since the moment he received their emergency transmission. He said certain people in Washington were very interested in making the Fallen Cedar situation disappear as quietly as possible, and that meant keeping the woman who had exposed it satisfied rather than prosecuted. He said she was not going to a trial. He said she was going to ceremony. Wraith looked at him, not understanding. Brennan smiled. It was the first time she had seen him smile since the helicopter landed. He said there were medals to be awarded and records to be corrected. He said 12 operators deserved to be remembered as heroes rather than casualties of a mission gone wrong. He said the truth was finally going to be told. Below them, the mountains fell away as the helicopter climbed toward clearer skies. Wraith watched them shrink until they were just shapes on the horizon, just memories fading into distance. 3 years. It was finally over. 3 months later, the Pentagon ceremony room was filled with dress uniforms and folded flags. Wraith stood at attention in the front row, wearing a uniform that still felt foreign after so long in salvaged tactical gear. The scar on her face drew glances from the assembled officers, but no one asked about it. Everyone in the room knew her story now. The Secretary of the Navy spoke from the podium about courage and sacrifice, about operators who had given everything in service to their country. His words were carefully chosen, acknowledging what had happened without dwelling on the corruption that had caused it. Washington was still learning how to talk about Fallen Cedar. 12 photographs lined stage. 12 faces frozen in official portraits. 12 names that would finally be honored as heroes rather than casualties of a mission gone wrong. Marcus Okafor's photograph was third from the left, his steady gaze unchanged by the years that had passed since it was taken. Wraith had requested to present his medal personally. The secretary called her forward and handed her the case containing the silver star. She turned to face the audience and found Damon Okafor in the second row, sitting beside a woman in her 60s whose eyes had not left her son's photograph since the ceremony began. Gloria Okafor, Marcus and Damon's mother. She had traveled from Detroit to receive her son's medal, to hear the truth about what had happened on a mountain 3 years ago. Rafe walked to where they sat and knelt before the older woman. The room fell silent. She said Marcus had been the finest operator she ever served with. She said his courage had saved her life and made everything that followed possible. She said he had spoken of his mother often during long nights on Overwatch, had carried her words with him into every mission. She said he had left a message he had entrusted to her with his final breath, a message she had carried across 3 years and 2,000 miles. She said he wanted her to know that the stars are the same everywhere. She said he had found his way home, even at the end. She said the stars had guided him just like she always promised. Gloria Okafor's composure shattered. Tears streamed down her face as she reached out and pulled Rafe into an embrace that held nothing back. She whispered that Rafe was family now. She whispered that anyone who had loved her son, who had carried his memory, who had fought to honor his sacrifice, would always have a place in her home and her heart. Damon put his hand on Rafe's shoulder. The weight of it felt like absolution. The ceremony continued with medals for the other fallen operators, with speeches about accountability and justice, with promises that what happened to fallen Cedar would never happen again. Rafe returned to her seat and watched the proceedings with the detachment of someone who had already processed her grief in the solitude of mountain caves. Afterward, in a hallway outside the ceremony room, Brennan found her. He said the trial was going well. Harwell had been denied bail, his defense attorney overwhelmed by the volume of evidence the prosecution had assembled. The helmet camera footage from Okafor had been particularly damning. Harwell's own words played back in a courtroom where everyone could see exactly what he was. But Harwell was not the only one facing justice. The investigation had expanded in the months since the rescue, climbing the chain of corruption toward the contractors and officials who had authorized the weapons program. 3 executives were under indictment. 2 Pentagon liaisons had resigned. Congressional hearings were scheduled for the following month. Rafe would be testifying for a long time. Brennan asked what she wanted to do next. He said he could arrange any posting she wanted. Instructor at the sniper school. Intelligence analyst at a comfortable desk. Medical retirement with full benefits if she needed time to heal. Rafe looked out the window at the gray January sky over Washington. She said she had spent 3 years watching. She said the mountains had taught her patience, had shown her that some problems could only be solved by someone willing to wait in the shadows until the moment was right. She said she was not ready to stop. Brennan nodded as if he had expected this answer. He said there was a new unit being formed. Off-book operations, situations that fell through the cracks of conventional military response. People who needed help that official channels could not provide. He said it required someone with a particular set of skills. Someone who understood how to survive alone in hostile territory. Someone who knew that sometimes justice required operating outside the system that had failed. He said the position was hers if she wanted it. 2 weeks later, Rafe stood in an outdoor shooting range in Virginia, adjusting the scope on a new rifle. The weapon was a custom build, a gift from Brennan's black budget. It felt different from the Macmillan she had carried through the mountains, lighter and more precise, but the fundamentals were the same. Patience, precision, the discipline to wait for the perfect moment. Footsteps approached behind her. She knew the rhythm before she turned. Okafor stopped beside the shooting bench, his own uniform replaced by civilian clothes. He had taken leave to spend time with his mother, to help her process everything that had emerged about Marcus's death. But now he was back, and there was a question in his eyes. He asked if this was the new assignment. Rafe set down the rifle and faced him. She said Brennan was putting together a team. Small, specialized, designed to handle situations that required someone who could watch and wait. Someone who understood that the best outcomes did not always come from the most obvious actions. She said there were people out there who had fallen through the cracks. Operators abandoned by systems that should have protected them. Families destroyed by corruption that would never face official accountability. Problems that required patience and precision rather than overwhelming force. She said she had learned something in those mountains. She had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was wait. Watch. Let the enemy reveal themselves before taking the shot. Okafor asked if she needed a spotter. Rafe looked at him, at the man who had trusted her when his commanding officer told him not to, at the brother of the operator who had saved her life, at the only person in the world who understood what she had survived and what it had cost. She smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had allowed herself since before Fallen Cedar, and it felt strange on a face that had forgotten how. She said she was hoping he would ask. They stood together at the edge of the range, watching the targets downrange shift in the winter wind. 3 years in the mountains had taught her to wait, to watch, to become invisible until the moment demanded action. But she had also learned something else in those lonely years. Even ghosts could come home. Even the dead could find justice. And sometimes the best shot was the one you never had to take. If this story moved you, drop a comment about what resonated most. Tell us about someone you know who showed hidden strength when everyone else had given up on them. And if you want to see where Wraith and Okafor's next mission takes them, let us know.